Thank you. Yeah, you said it was starting soon. I just said starting. Sorry. All right. Court, all rise, please. Eddie. All persons have anything to do before the Honorable, the Justices of the Appeals Court, now sitting at Boston within and for the Commonwealth. Draw near, give me your attendance, and you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This court is open. Please be seated.
Thank you for that rousing cry. Welcome to today's short session of the Appeals Court. It's Monday, March 3rd, and we're hearing just one case, 23P113, Commonwealth versus Bruno, Lopes. And thank you both for coming up here on short notice. And you're both experienced attorneys here. 15 minutes per side, no rebuttal. We've read the materials, so jump right into it. You're free to use all 15 minutes, and there's no penalty for stopping early. So.
May it please the court, Catherine Essington on behalf of the defendant Bruno Lopes. I'd like to start with the first issue in the brief, whether the trial judge erred in allowing a police officer to identify the defendant from various surveillance video clips during the trial. This issue is preserved, so this court reviews for prejudicial error. The defendant contends that many of the video clips here are hopelessly obscure under pleas.
So what I think would really help for us is to try and figure out exactly what the officer testified about and which videos we're talking about. So how many, there were 3 or 4 that in which it was Officer Acuna said it was the defendant, right?
Yeah, so there's obviously a number of videos. From what I can tell, the ones where he actually identified Mr. Lopes are and some of them I refer to sort of as a series of videos, such as the Monty's Park, I think was the first identification he makes of Mr. Lopes. There's sort of a long video shot from very far away of a car and a couple of individuals outside that car. I would suggest that Mr. Rocha, who was ultimately killed in this incident, is identifiable based on his sweatshirt, which is a polo sweatshirt. There is another individual next to him. You cannot see any features. But the officer identified the person standing next to Mr. Rocha as Mr. Lopes. I would suggest that strange credulity where it's really far away, it's really dark, you really can't see anything other than perhaps some of the clothing that the person alleged to be Mr. Lopes is wearing. There's a lot of discussion in the trial, as this court knows, about the Nike swoosh on the shorts. So that's the first series, the Monty's Park series. Then there's another series.
Can we just pause there? I think,
sure.
Sorry to be sort of tedious here, but actually my understanding is that we need to assess each of these separately, right? I mean, it's possible that we would agree with you entirely and say he shouldn't have been able to testify at all, but it's also possible that we would parse them and say, well, as to some, he could testify, and you sort of acknowledge that there's, if there's one thing that seems really strange to you, it's I think it's Exhibit 5, the shirt the shirt change video. So with respect to the Monty's Park videos, there was also testimony from, I can't remember whether it was Aaliyah or Aziza, the woman who was there whose car it was, Ms. Rampersand, I think, that, maybe it was Ms. Martin, that was Mr. Lopes, correct?
It was Ms. Martin. She testifies that I don't know that she did testify that it was Mr. Lopes. I can't recall, honestly. She testifies that she's very intoxicated and doesn't remember much from the evening. I do agree with your premise, which is that I do think the court needs to sort of parse this out. I guess I would argue with respect to the Monty's Park video, while that shouldn't have been allowed, Mr. Lope contends, certainly the prejudice may have been minimal with respect to that series because, as you noted, Ms. Rampersand and Ms. Martin kind of placed him at the scene later along with some other witnesses. So I think in terms of prejudice, that's maybe minimal, but I do think it is hopelessly obscure. The next series then that the officer identifies the defendant in is this series from the driveway of 17 Margin. There's 3 individuals walking towards the house. There's some audio in there of a person saying Louis, addressing one of the occupants of the house. Then, there's, I think, a later video showing the approach of just Mr. Rocha and Ms. Rampersand. The defendant is not contesting those identifications, basically due to the voice aspect of those. I do think there is audible voice, and the officer, I don't dispute that he had sufficient familiarity to identify Mr. Lopes by voice.
So just so make sure I'm following, that's Exhibit 2, which are the garage, it's I guess a garage camera, but it shows a driveway along the side of 17.
Yes, it's a little bit confusing to refer to just like Exhibit 2 or Exhibit 5 here because all of those exhibits have multiple clips in them.
So when you say you're not contesting, I just want to make sure I follow. You're not contesting the ability of Officer DeCunha to testify to the clip on Exhibit 5 in which someone says Louis, and then the other clip in which someone says Aziza.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, and it may be Exhibit 2. I can't recall if it's Exhibit 2 or Exhibit 5. I think those are the key ones, Exhibit 2, Exhibit 5, and maybe the full travels exhibits are sort of the key ones here. But each one has 4 or 5 parts. Then there's the sequence of, there's a sequence of people running that the prosecutor tries to say is Mr. Lopes and Ms. Rampersand. However, I don't believe the officer makes an identification from that sequence. My brother can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But the next identification that I think is really critical in this case is the sequence of a man emerging from a driveway. We have no information about whose driveway that is, but there's a sequence of him emerging shirtless and traveling down the street and simultaneously putting a white shirt on his body, not over his head, on his body. And that sequence, the officer does identify Mr. Lopes in that sequence. And I would argue that that is also hopelessly obscure, and that the jury was in as good a position as the officer. There's no audio in that sequence. It's very dark. It's grainy. It's shot from some distance away. The officer admits that he can't see any facial features in that sequence, but says that he's identifying Mr. Lopes based on his gait and his hairstyle, I believe.
I'm looking at the transcript. I think he says body type.
Body type and hairstyle.
Body type, so, excuse me. And so I think there's nothing distinctive about Mr. Lopes's body type or hairstyle. His hair is in a short afro, which the court, I think, can take notice of. It's extremely common for African-American or men of color. There's just simply nothing distinctive about that. So that one is the one I think that is very prejudicial to Mr. Lopes, unfairly so, because that sequence is immediately before the final sequence of the man approaching the driveway with something obscuring his head and firing into the house.
Now, and that last one, the officer does not identify the defendant. That's left for the jury.
Yeah, he does not at trial. I think he does during voir dire, which I think is relevant because that's when the court's making a ruling on admissibility. He says he can infer that that's Mr. Lopes, but he does not say that at this trial. He does testify to that at the retrial, as I quoted in my reply brief.
We can't really consider what he did at the retrial as to whether the evidence was sufficient at this trial, can we?
No, but I think that I put it in there because I thought it was interesting that the court was then saying that that's an ultimate issue for the jury. I guess I would argue that the sequence of the man putting on the shirt should have been included in that sort of, this is the ultimate question for the jury, is this person who's emerged from this driveway the same person as who the officer has said is Mr. Lopes, or who other witnesses have identified clearly he's there, but is this person emerging from the driveway him? That was the ultimate issue in the case, I would argue.
And so is it just the proximity and time of the two videos, or would you also say that the clothing that he's identified in just before is the same clothing as in the alley with the shooting video?
Yeah, the clothing, I mean, I think it's both. I think that, it's seconds before, I believe. It's a little hard to tell because some of these videos are off in terms of time, but I believe it's just seconds before. The clothing is a little hard in some of these videos because what I've noted is when the cameras turn on, there's a moment to sort of adjust for light. But it does appear that the person who emerges from the driveway has no swish on his shorts. In the other videos, the swish is pretty clearly visible, but there is no swish in that sequence. And
should we take judicial notice? Is it a swoosh?
Swoosh,
sure it's a
sorry,
swoosh.
swoosh, yes. And
So in those last two, there's no visible swoosh.
that's
As
correct.
opposed to, yeah.
And the prosecutor argues at trial that, somehow that Mr. Lopes has turned his shorts inside out. I don't think there's any evidence of that, but that's how he explains the lack of the swoosh. And I think the shirt the individual is wearing also, obviously he's putting on a white shirt, but then the shorts also appear lighter, like in the earlier videos of what, the officer testifies as Mr. Lopes. He appears to be wearing black shorts and a dark shirt, and so now these clothes are different, both front and bottom.
When you say that the shorts appear darker, so I noticed the same thing you mentioned. I had a different interpretation of it, but for whatever technology-related reason, at the beginning of the driveway videos, the man walking along the side of the house down the driveway appears to be dressed entirely in light-colored clothing. And then as he reaches the corner of the house, suddenly the color changes in the video, right? And you can see that actually he's wearing dark-colored clothing. Or, I don't know about actually, but suddenly he appears to be wearing dark-colored clothing. When you say that in the later video his shorts appear to be lighter, is that a driveway video or is that one of the South Street videos?
I think it's pretty hard to tell the color in the South Street videos. Part of the time, I think the man's lower body is obscured by the vehicle parked on the sideway. So I guess I would say in the driveway videos, the shorts appear to be a lighter color. But I would agree with you that the color thing is difficult because of I think it's because the camera, aperture is adjusting. It takes a moment after it comes back to life from its motion detection.
Was there any evidence about that? Any testimony about why that is in the trial?
There was not, no.
So it sounds to me like you're not really contesting the officer's familiarity with the defendant. It seems like your strongest point is that the videos are they're hopelessly obscure that he wouldn't be able to identify the defendant from them.
That's correct, Your Honor. And I think in this case it was extremely prejudicial. There was, no explanation again of who owned this house, that the driveway that the person went in and that, a man emerged from later. There's no DNA, there's no fingerprints. We know Mr. Lopes was at the scene initially, but so were a dozen other people or more. I'm also struck by the fact that during these videos, you can see that even though it's 4:30 in the morning,
it's like everybody's out and about.
Exactly. There's a fair number of people just walking down the street. So I think this was a critical identification that had the imprint of authority because it was a police officer. He testified he was 100% certain. So I think that it really made a difference in this case. I see that my time is up unless the court has any questions. I will rest on the second issue on my brief. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
May it please the court, David Mark for the Commonwealth. I wanted to start with a couple of points where I disagree with my sister's understanding of the facts. The first is the timing of the South 2nd Street video with respect to the timing of the video of the shooting itself. She says moments before. My reading of the timestamps is that it's 2 minutes earlier. And tending to corroborate,
When you say the shooting, you're talking about the shooting up of the house, not the...
Yes, that's
okay,
right.
Thank you.
There's some evidence that some of the timestamps are off? Is that 2 minutes accounting
Yes, but no, that's
for
corrected for that. My understanding is there's a 2-minute gap. And there's an intervening identification by Rose Andrade, who after that, if you infer the travel out to South 2nd Street and then back to 17 Transit, Rose Andrade's identification would be after. She says she was familiar with the defendant and recognized him moving in the direction of Transit Street. That would have been after the South 2nd Street video. So in effect, the Officer Detective DeCunha's identification is corroborated by that. But in any event, I would also say, Justice Hershfang, you've clearly seen the video. I would say my viewing of it is that piece is actually the clearest piece of videotape we see. It's just that the figure being depicted is distant from the camera, but it's a nice clean piece of video. Judges.
Is this the one, the putting on the shirt series?
Yes, that's the one I mean. So Judge Dupuy's conclusion that was neither hopelessly obscure nor so clear that the jury could themselves decide who was depicted seems well within her discretion to have made that call.
There's no visible short swoosh in that sequence, correct?
Yes, but there's a lovely piece of close observation work that is highlighted by the prosecutor in his closing. He says you could infer the shorts have been turned inside out. If you look at the video after the shooting, as the shooter retreats up the driveway, you see these little flaps on either side of his shorts, right? What's the inference?
Pockets, right.
He's turned the pants inside out. So with all due respect to my sister, I think she's just wrong. There is evidence that he turned the shorts inside out, which would account for the absence of a visible swoosh in that video.
At least want to speculate what the inside of a swoosh looks like, but on the other way.
Not much in the dark.
Right, right.
As to Justice Hershfang's observation about the change in color, there is no testimony about this. I just inferred that the camera's motion have activated and it turned on a light, which is why there's suddenly a change in the color.
We have one published case that has to do with like inferring from infrared cameras, it's a demonstration whether you could infer that the light it's like common knowledge that that's infrared photography. So like, it's a contested case. It had a dissent. I forget the last couple of years. Anyway.
I don't remember the case. It is that first, I don't think it's an infrared camera either, at least no one identifies it as such, although now that you say that,
Well, it's in the dark, right?
Sorry?
It's dark, and yet it's showing something.
Yes,
so I had assumed.
and now that you say that, that kind of sort of ghostly image that you see before the light comes on is sort of consistent with infrared, but I actually hadn't considered that, and
Well, there's no evidence at all of it, but
yeah.
But when I saw the video, it struck me as that's what I was seeing, it's that ghost thing.
So I just want to, Ms. Andrade testifies, I think, you'll tell me if I'm remembering this wrong, that the man with the thing over his head, I'm not going to say what it was, because I think that was the defendant.
So this is an interesting thing. I don't think she testifies, and I could be wrong.
Her testimony is equivocal, I guess is where I'm trying to get at. But go ahead.
I don't remember her testifying that she saw that the person she identified as Bruno Lopes had a thing over his head at the time that she sees it. But the videos sort of suggest that as they're passing, that person already has something covering his head. So I don't know quite how to reconcile that, but and maybe I misread the testimony. But I had thought that Andrade didn't remark on the face being covered, but she recognized him anyway. I thought she testified that she recognized that it was Bruno Lopes, whom she knew having dated him, among other things.
So she says, I guess this is where I was going, and then I got us off track. She says, but in that video, you can't really see, but yeah, that was the scenario, like. That's not what I'd call like a ringing identification.
I think she's...
Do you think that that's better than I think it is?
Well, so I'm at the disadvantage of not having the transcript in front of me, but what I think you just read is sort of her assessment of the video rather than her recollection of what she, how strong her sense at the time was that she was looking at Bruno Lopes. I think it's her reaction to the video.
I think you're right, actually, yes. She says, so now I have the video. I mean, not the video, the transcript. I also have the video, but that would be slow. He does say, I saw him, he was on the other side of the street, he was walking in the opposite direction. So you're right, the identification is not fuzzy.
Okay. So in sum on this issue, I just disagree with my sister. I think the case is very strong, and I think the facts show that Justice Dupuy was well within her discretion in deciding that this video fell into that zone of not hopelessly indistinct and not, incontrovertibly clear, that the testimony of someone who knew Mr. Lopes well wouldn't assist the jury in assessing whether indeed the videos showed him.
How about the Montes Park one, or that long shot one?
to me, that's the least clear and the most surprising, that he can identify, as he says, Bruno Lopes from looking at that video, because it is a very distant shot, as you know. As my sister said, that would also be the sort of least prejudicial, because it's so much earlier. This is before any of the rest of this happens.
The beginning of the story.
Yeah, it's right at the beginning of the story. So, and after that, the videos get better and better, and of course, as my sister acknowledged, there's the pieces with the voice identification, where you have not just the appearance, but the sound of the voice, which he says he recognized, so. I would not talk about the second issue unless there are questions on it.
I have no questions on it.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, again, thank you both for coming out here today, and the case is submitted. And we're in recess.
Will all rise, please?
It should always be that fast.
Court is now in recess.